everyone. My name is Angela Banks. I am a 2L day student here at the University of the District of Columbia, David A. Clark School of Law. And to kick off Women's History Month, I have the honor to speak with a woman who made history herself. So to get started, you made history as the first woman mayor in the District of Columbia. How did your upbringing and experiences in DC influence your approach to leadership and governance?
Well, um, without a doubt. I mean, having grown up in Washington, having been born in Washington, and been born at a time when the hospital I was born in was still called Freedmen's Hospital, a carryover from the Civil War. Um, it very much influenced my sense of irritation that we were not full participants in the American experience, that here we were, hundreds of thousands of people serving this great citadel of democracy, but not able to participate in the democracy. And that being exacerbated by the racial, limitations that were then imposed in America. And we still see the battle going on. So wanting very much for DC to be respected, DC to have a dignified, appropriate role in the American experience had very much influenced so much of what I did as mayor. There's no question about it. Maybe to the extreme. So when they saw me coming, they knew it was going to be about DC statehood, no matter the topic.
Understood. Well, that's wonderful. And I think that is very influential as well. And prior to your mayoral tenure, you were involved in national politics, serving as the Democratic National Committee as its treasurer, where you became the first woman to hold that position. So how did your experience in national politics prepare you for your challenges of local governance?
Well, the great thing about, at that time, DC finally had gotten home rule. That's when the state party, I mean, DC had elections for the Democratic Central Committee was called, but DC didn't really have much of a role. We did have the ability to vote for president as a result of the 23rd Amendment, but that's it. We didn't really have active participation. By the time I sought office, it was at a time when, on the heels of the civil rights movement, there finally had come to fruition limited home rule legislation. It began with Lyndon Johnson, who was the president when they signed the 65 Voting Rights Act. He had been the man who would push legislation in the wake of the assassination of King, assassination of Bobby Kennedy, and obviously he became president because there had been the assassination of John Kennedy. And he established, that's a lot of history, but he established then the template for home rule when he appointed a mayor, Walter Washington, appointed the chairman of the council and so forth. But the legislation actually got signed when Richard Nixon was president, but it was Lyndon Johnson who set it in motion, along with important people like Charlie Diggs, who was a congressman, a Black congressman out of Michigan, Mac Mathias, a Republican out of Maryland, along with obviously people like Ted Kennedy. But by the time once we got home rule, there was an electricity in this city. People who suddenly wanted to be involved in a way they had never had the opportunity previously. And one way they got involved was not only around candidates for office, but also they put together slates for the Democratic, what was Central Committee, we called it State Committee because we started saying, no, we're going to be a state. And Patricia Roberts Harris, who later became Secretary of HUD, was the elected committee woman. And anyhow, the long and short is Jimmy Carter won. He appointed her to his cabinet and her alternate to his White House. And so I was able to win as committee woman. Once I won it, it was a really wonderful time in America to be active in national politics. The people I got to meet were people like Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi was just getting started as the chairman of the state committee of the state of California. Steny Hoyer. Well, he was congressman then, but people like Lanny Davis. I mean, I don't know if you people it was so many interesting people. Hillary Clinton was coming through. It was Black activism. Women was beginning to say, no, 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 we're going to be at the table too.
Yeah.
And so it was a very exciting time to be involved with national politics. That was a perfect forum. I loved it. And as Nancy became chairman of the Western region, I became chairman of the Eastern region. And then ultimately I ran for and won as, well, long story, but I won as treasurer. I loved it. It was a great time.
Yes, it sounds so electrifying, just as you stated. And I think that leads us into our next question as well, is what inspired you to enter local politics and run for mayor? Because for those looking on the outside, I think looking at those who enter into politics, it can seem as a heavy lift, but a much needed lift. And you need people in those spaces. So could you just speak to what inspired you more to enter into politics and run for mayor?
I never thought I'd seek office. I always wanted to be at the I wanted to be near power. I was a good student in political science, and I had enough sense to know that the real power was those who sit near the throne and not necessarily those on the throne. Because if you're on the throne, you're constantly on the go. You're like a beach ball that gets pushed from place to place. And actually, I got involved initially by supporting my former husband, who became the first, among the very first elected officials in Washington as a result of home rule. He was the council member, Arrington Dixon, from Ward 4. But I always understood enough to know there are two levels of power in this country, only two real levels of power. They are capitalism, and as an African American, we have access to almost no capital. Our only role in the capitalist system was primarily to be the capital. We were capital that was bartered for 247 years. And when that ended, there was no 40 acres and a mule, no reparations. We have no capital until this day of 2024. The other lever of power, politics. And so my hope was, let us get our hands on at least that lever of power. When I was graduating from Howard and Lyndon Baines Johnson said he was going to sign the Voting Rights Act, I was so excited. I don't think I remembered anything else about that day, because I knew that once we had that, we had the capacity to really have a muscle in the United States. And Frank Reeves was the first founding director of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. He was one of my law professors at Howard, and he invited me to be a lawyer with the Joint Center. And there were, at best, all over the whole country, only about 400 Black elected officials at township levels, not real major levels. As a result of that act, there was an explosion of power with Black mayors. Suddenly you had enough members of who in Congress to create a congressional Black caucus. Before, there weren't enough people to do that, but then now you did. So all of that to say, I understood this was a lever of power. It meant that we as a community of people had the means by which to have a presence, make some demands as any other citizen has a right to. So I wanted to be a part of that.
Yes, and I think that's a very powerful statement that you said, that those with power sit near the throne. And just being in law school, I've continued to learn and see just how much power and influence you can have just when you get involved in your state and local government. And it's important to be involved in those aspects because we all need each other as a community as well. So as moving as a first woman to assume the roles of treasurer of the DNC and the mayor of the District of Columbia, did you encounter specific challenges due to your gender? And looking back, how do you think being a woman influenced your experience in these positions?
Well, without a doubt, I mean, listen, it's there all the time. The prejudice is very deep, but it doesn't just exist just with men. I mean, women can be hard on other women. And So, if women, given our numbers in the population, you could easily have a president if women just voted for women.
Mhm.
I mean, on occasion that we voted for women, but we don't really. And there, when people are inculcated with notions of who has what place in our society,
Mhm.
everybody becomes a victim, including people who are impacted by it. Same thing as it is with race. That's why I love Isabel Wilkerson's book, The Caste. It's more than a racism. It's that we have a caste system that says who has worth and who doesn't have worth. And you can see that like on January 6th, white police officers, Hispanic police, Black police officers, even with people coming in there with pitchforks, coming in there saying they were going to kill the vice president and the speaker of the house, breaking windows. Not one, and I'm not saying I wanted people killed, not one white man was killed.
Mhm.
The only person they shot was a woman.
Mhm.
I mean, can you imagine Black men run, put their hands up in the air and say, I have nothing on me, and people unload their gun on them.
Mhm.
That's why we have to say Black Lives Matter. All that to say, even Black police officers, and they were fighting. Listen, don't misunderstand me. They deserve all our respect for trying to defend our capital. But the same thing is true with women, of
Mhm.
notions of who should have power and who shouldn't have power. And yes, there were prejudices of notions about what I could do, couldn't do, what I'd understand, wouldn't understand. Dianne Feinstein, who had been mayor of San Francisco, said, Sharon, be careful on this, dealing with what is now the Commanders, the Redskins, then try not to lose it because they'll blame it on you as a woman.
Mhm.
Uh, and they did blame it on me, even though it was Jack and Cook unwilling to spend the money and try to get the support of members of Congress. That was the problem. So yes, it's people of it, only through experience do you begin to break those models. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And when you see have more, more and more examples of people like Pelosi, like Hillary Clinton, and others, Kamala Harris now, then you began to break that mold in your mind, that model in your mind of who should have power and who shouldn't have power. But it was very hard. I mean, I couldn't think about it that much. But
Right.
when the guys would come to the office to cut a deal with the mayor, their notion was coming in the room with somebody, where they could smoke the cigar and somebody with power, not somebody with heels and a skirt.
Mhm.
So, it just completely undermined their sense of, gosh, I mean, this is all I'm going to get? So
Right.
it's there.
Right. The power that women have, especially Black women, is so underestimated. So, what advice would you offer to women aspiring to pursue careers in politics and leadership roles?
Well, I mean, I just think you have to go for what you believe in. If you
Mhm.
believe in something and you have strong convictions about it, that will almost always carry the day. You'll be heard. And if you think about what you can't do, then you'll be a victim of your own thoughts. Your thoughts should be propelling you forward. And you shouldn't be propelled forward because you say, oh, I'm going to do it in spite of, or how dare they do that. No, I think for me, it's about, I believe in this, and I want to advance this. And because I care about it so much, I'm going to push for it. And I can't get caught up in the fact that people don't think I'm the right one to be doing it.
Mhm.
Um, if I'm not, life will let me know that. But I just think you see more and more women stepping up, coming forward. And I just think they've got to be driven by their own convictions, their own thoughts, and their own sense of empowerment.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. That's really wonderful advice. And just also a reminder just to make sure you have confidence as well leading forward in what you do. And so, as mayor, you implemented significant reforms and initiatives to address the city's challenges. What do you consider your most significant accomplishments during your time in office, and how do you believe they impacted the city's trajectory?
Well, what mattered to me most got dismantled was the youth initiative, where we pulled together, you know, agencies across the spectrum, from federal to state, to across branches of government, to try to create anchors, an environment of support for our young people who are in a very troubled circumstance. I mean, we know that the family structure has been greatly undermined, and that has been tenfold for Black community. I mean, America had an assault on our family from the time we arrived, with the Middle Passage.
Right.
And the residuals of that are still with us. But what I think had the most tangible impact, although we don't get credit for it, is trying to position Washington, D.C. as more than a sleepy Southern town, to begin to see herself as a major, sophisticated destination, a major metropolis in the world, on the world stage. Case in point, I was the one who went to Anne Coroligus. She was the head of federal city council. And I said, Anne, could you go to Abe Poland? He really wants to have basketball in an urban environment, and we need to have him here in this environment. We're going to provide him with the land tax benefits if he'll do that. And she did it, and that process got underway. Now, then people started, I was determined that we should get as many concessions as possible that would result in some preference for jobs for people from the district and preference for vendors from the district. But it was a tough environment towards the end because Marion and I were running against each other really formally this time, and up John Ray. So they were kind of negotiating against me, which is how it works. But at the end of the day, we got it. The city got it. Secondly, we started Taste of DC. And that was a way to remind everybody that we have a rich, a wide spectrum of cultures here. And that's on display with our cuisine.
Yeah.
I pushed hard to bring soccer here, and to, celebrate again how we are a culturally diverse community. And so that soccer is very much a part of that. We pushed hard to bring more motion picture productions here, and we did. I think we had the greatest number. We brought, Pelican Brief. So everybody was falling out the window with when Denzel was coming through there. Denzel and Julia Roberts. We had worked with Rob Reiner, and we worked to make certain St. Elizabeth's was available for A Few Good Men. We had Gentleman's Agreement. We had I think we had 20 some productions, in film during that period of time. We just kept doing everything we could to try to position the District of Columbia, Washington, as this, more than this sleepy Southern town, more than an afterthought when you come and visit the Washington Monument. There's so much more to us than that. And I think that did have a lasting effect.
Thank you for sharing, because this just is a reminder of how much rich history lies within DC. And so as you were just speaking earlier in regards to the push for statehood for DC, and I know that you were strongly committed to the advocacy for that, were there any challenges that specifically stick out to you that you face in advancing the cause for statehood?
Well, we do know that there's a prejudice because of the racial makeup, but also the ideological makeup of the district. The pushback are obviously from those of conservative, because they know it would be a progressive votes in the Senate. But that's not a good reason. And it took a long time, I'm telling you, to get even our own Democrats to get on board. It's only in recent years, I think there are about 44, maybe 46, but there should be more Democrats on board. But at that time, the only real, well, I shouldn't say that, but the most active, I forced a vote. I shouldn't say I alone. Dick Gregory was out there marching with me, Reverend Al. I give them credit. They both came faithfully and marched. Mark Thompson, who I love, who's on our senior advisory committee for IPPH, they came out and faithfully marched. And of course, Jesse Jackson was our shadow senator. So Jesse, and we forced them, they were we got arrested. My view is if we shut 14th Street down and said we are not moving till we get respect and are respected as a state, we'd carry the day, because people don't know that we are treated this way. Ted Kennedy used to say, Sharon, the reason they get away, he's my brother, Jack used to say, it's the best kept secret in the world. People don't know that 700,000 people have no vote. So, but we forced a vote, and of course our congresswoman, our delegate, not congresswoman, but delegate, Eleanor Holmes Norton, but people like Maxine Waters, they were wonderful. And we got at least a vote. We didn't win, but we got the vote. But since that time, people like Pelosi had taken leadership position, and she is a faithful supporter of DC statehood, faithful supporter. And but it's about the counting the votes. You have in this country now, well, I won't go into all of the history of it, but from the beginning of America, that Southern element, that conservative element, has always managed to win the day on where the votes and where the process was settled. From the beginning, when they did the 3/5 human being in the Constitution, that was to ensure that they could count people that they didn't let vote. They could count them so they got more seats for congressional districts and more votes in the electoral college. Look how that's played itself out. The popular vote goes one way, the electoral college goes another.
Yeah.
For years, they had control in the House and the Senate. Why? Because they had the ability, they could get seniority. You're gonna get seniority if you can count people that can't vote. I mean, you got all these people that you can count for your seat, but they can't vote. So naturally, you don't get challenged. You're going to be there forever and ever. And in that system of seniority, you're going to have more power. So and as the country shifts ideologically and racially, you see pushback on what? Voting rights, suppression of voting rights. And so there are two things they're doing: packing the courts and blocking the vote. And so in this environment, you do know that they're going to their major pushback against 700,000 Americans having representation, because those 2 Senate seats could make all the difference. Whether it's gun control in America, people overwhelmingly want it, but why can't you get it? Because of how we skew that vote, whether it's climate change or women's reproductive rights. How can you have these overwhelming sentiments? It's sort of like the popular vote versus the electoral college. Who gets to have the power? And so that's why we have major pushback about DC statehood. But the Democrats should be as aggressive about it as are we in the District of Columbia, and we in the District of Columbia should be more aggressive about it. How dare they take our taxes and expect so much of us and deny us the right for full participation in the American experience? How dare they?
And I completely agree with you. And I just want to say I thank you for your courage in facing those challenges head on. And just even in those moments, do you have a memorable moment or even a lesson that you during your time as mayor that you learned that had a lasting impact on your approach to leadership and public service?
Well, we had a lot of we had a lot of rocky moments, so there was a lot to it. I think the basic lesson for me was the most important thing is to listen. You know, I could win in part because I used to win oratorical contests. And so that was really, if anything, that was arguably my strength. But at the end of the day, it's not how well you speak, it's how well you listen. If you just listen to people, hear what's on their mind, hear what's in their heart, and try to speak to that. If you can speak to that, particularly if you're trying to get them also to buy into what you think is an imperative next step, you're going to get there faster. And I do think sometimes, especially when you're much younger, as I was then, when you come on and you mean well because you're so driven to achieve X, Y, and Z, it's the beauty of what you're fighting for is what? Representative democracy. And in a representative democracy, you've got to represent. And you cannot represent unless you listen. And I think that if there was a lesson for me, although my children may say I still haven't learned, but is that it's so very important to listen.
Thank you for that. And I'm thankful to be able to hear from you, and to really listen in on all the great, wonderful stories, history that you just providing today. I really appreciate that. And so even moving from your mayoral tenure, you pursued consulting work and continue to be involved in public service. Can you discuss your post-mayoral activities and how they reflect your ongoing commitment to improving governance and community development in the District of Columbia?
Well, there are two things, with which I've been most involved. Um, one of which was around the housing crisis. And that was because what I talked about earlier. What are the two things you have in America? Capital and vote, you know. And there was a loss of net worth in the Black community that was outrageous with the foreclosure crisis. All communities lost net worth, but we lost 25 years of net worth because we were so long being able to buy a house. I mean, there was slavery, then there was Jim Crow, then there was the Homestead Act, no, nothing for Black people, GI Bill, almost nothing for Black people, and then redlining. So you're lucky if you have two or even three generations of Black families that have owned a home. And if you can pass it down, then you're building up net worth. Well, Black community really got devastated, lost so much. And so as a result of it, a request by Fannie Mae, I and a few folks began to look at it. So that's something I'm still involved with, through that nonprofit that came into existence to deal with it. We still haven't dealt with it as at the scale we need to do. But of course, my first and foremost love is always Washington, D.C. And so I just have run a nonprofit established, housed at the University of the District of Columbia, called the Institute of Politics, Policy, and History. And Mayor Bowser, and then at that time, President Mason helped us to launch that in 2019. And the purpose is primarily to focus on the history of Washington, D.C. We are such a central part of the narrative of America. And the first political deal cut by this brand new country was a deal that brought the capital here along the banks of the Potomac. And we want to chronicle that story. It's amazingly how it is a story that's not well chronicled. There was a mention of it in the musical Hamilton when they talk about the room where it happened, and we are what happened, because a lot of the founding fathers, people like Madison and Jefferson, and to a great extent George Washington, they did not want that capital in the state of Pennsylvania. Why? Because it was an abolitionist leaning state. All those Quakers up there, and they were pushing hard to end slavery. And they wanted to make certain this capital was in a location that respected slavery, the practice of slavery. And one half of all enslaved people in America at that time in 1790, right here along in the Chesapeake region. So we want to tell that story and other stories. And right now we're beginning the series on the Civil War, how that really catapulted Washington, D.C. into becoming a major city, because this was the home for the Union Army. This was the first place that had emancipation, and enslaved people started running across the line to get here to DC. And this had a real federal presence. You had to build up a real federal presence. And finally, with Ulysses S. Grant, he stood up Reconstruction, and so you have more of a federal presence. So that's why there was a place like a Freedmen's Hospital. So we want to tell that story about, tell more of these stories that are so reflective of America, but also the story of this very important place called Washington, D.C.
And it's important to always keep history at the forefront as we continue to progress, because you need to know where you came from in order to also know where you're going. So
Right.
I thank you for just continuing to put out the history. And just even as you are the founding director of the University of the District of Columbia's Institute for Politics, Policy, and History, that is the bread and butter. And so could you just share with us the vision and the mission that you had behind the Institute and how you're bringing that vision to life? And how could students even get involved with the Institute as well?
That'd be great. Our vision is one to, again, sort of like what we did about DC's more than a sleepy Southern town, also to establish how central our history is to the American story. We're almost a stand-in for the American story, because what we want to do is for people to really appreciate and have a better grasp of who we are. Remember what I said, Jack Kennedy said, it's the best kept secret. People know nothing about us. And how Pierre L'Enfant designed this city, what inspired him? The Declaration of Independence. He had everything moving in the direction not of the president's house, but of Jenkins Hill, what later became, for the people's meeting place, known as the U.S. Capitol. All power resides with the people. And so the city's very design is a reflection of America's commitment to have a government of the people. But at the same time, the very same people brought the Capitol here in order to protect the institution of slavery, and therefore the people who built this great monument to freedom and of the people were by and large enslaved people, be it the president's house, be it the Capitol. And so that irony exists in America, and the irony that we wanted to play out is how that irony, how that was in terms of the selection of the Capitol, but it is the trying to end that institution that really catapults the Capitol into becoming a meaningful city. But there are many stories here, many interesting stories that, again, give you a glimpse of the country and how we are so intrinsic to that narrative. That's what I want people to understand. This is an important city. This is the capital of the country, and we reflect of the better angels of America and the demons that undermine us.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate that as well, just because even just going to UDC, I feel like I wake up every day and just find new history, just whether it's from the school, those who were involved, and just how UDC has also just impacted the community as well. So again, like if there's any way for students to get involved, I know myself and my peers at the law school would love to do so. So just to close out, I just wanted to ask, just what is your favorite memory since founding the UDC Institute for Politics, Policy, and History? What's your favorite memory since joining the Firebird Nation?
Favorite memory about Washington, you mean?
Uh, since founding the
The
Institute,
Institute?
joining Firebird Nation, yes.
Well, there's so many interesting stories that have emerged. One is how many of what people call at Montpelier, James Madison's home, the invisible founders, how many times we acknowledge, let's say, James Madison and his cohorts in the creating of the Constitution, how many invisible founders, people enslaved, helped to make that happen? How many times we're sort of the ghost in the room, and how that spills over into Washington, D.C. There's something special about this city. We're still searching for what is the source of that special sauce that makes us who we are. Some of it, I think, is that you had a aggregation of people who had been those invisible founders coming here because of these others arriving here in order to, implement the Constitution and administer the government. I apologize for the background.
No problem.
But at any rate, seeing how all of that spills over into who we are in this city today. So that's been fascinating, and I think it's a story we can still build upon.
For sure. Well, I just wanted to thank you for your time and commitment to our community, to the District of Columbia, and of course to the UDC community as well. It's really just been a pleasure talking with you, learning from you, and just hearing still the passion and advocacy that you have for the District of Columbia. It's so needed, and I just really and greatly appreciate that. And as a student here at the law school, myself and my peers are grateful for the connection and impact that you made here. So it was just a joy speaking with you as we close out. So thank you so much. And if there's any lasting words, please feel free to share.
Well, we want you, Angela, to stay in touch because we would like to get you and others involved. As we begin to build out more, either as fellows or interns or something. We would love that energy and insight and wisdom. And so please, let's stay connected.
Of course. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
You as well. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.